Good morning.
Goodness, you didn't expect to get to this stage, did you, with this Prime Minister?
Well, I think after the weekend's newspapers, with very well-informed comment, I don't think anyone's particularly surprised that this has happened this morning. And the 15% barrier is a relatively low barrier to achieve. So I don't think we should be that surprised by it.
Well, it's 54 MPs at least, 15%, as you say, of your colleagues have felt strongly enough to write a letter about this Prime Minister who won with an 80-seat majority just 2.5 years into this Parliament. That doesn't alarm you at all?
Well, I think you would find in all parties at all times there's about 15% who, for whatever reason, don't like the leader of the party. Sometimes it's ideological, and we saw Tobias Ellwood call for a return to the single market. So there is a strong element of people who don't like Brexit, would like to reverse Brexit, and feel that the Prime Minister is the great strength and stay and support of Brexit, who want to remove him. And then there are others who are far from being gruntled for other reasons.
What other reasons?
Well, you can work it out for yourself, that there are people who have their concerns. There always are. This is the nature of politics. Leaders are not like Kim Jong-un. They don't have every member of their party supporting them fully at all times. So I don't think getting to the 15% bar is particularly damaging or indeed particularly surprising. I think it's a relatively low bar and fairly easy to get to.
Peter Kellner, formerly of YouGov, as you know, told us if 100 rebels voted against the Prime Minister about that tonight, then he is held below the waterline.
Well, I fundamentally disagree. I mean, I think Peter Kellner is an exceptionally distinguished pollster who I think often has useful things to say about politics. But in democracy, one is enough. And look, I tried this line when I was not entirely supportive of Theresa May, saying she hadn't won enough. And actually everyone said to me afterwards that was absolute nonsense, and I had to eat a good deal of my own words. And so I think the idea that there is a barrier different from the absolute barrier is false.
And yet just a few months later she was gone.
Well, between that time, she had lost a vote in the House of Commons by the biggest record, I think, in history. So, yes, indeed, but that was because of what went on in the House of Commons. It wasn't a further reflection on the vote of no confidence. And she also had the Conservatives' worst ever poll in the European elections, as you may recall. So other things went very badly wrong post that vote of confidence. It wasn't a direct consequence.
How many Conservative Prime Ministers have long-term survived a vote of no confidence?
Well, this system only came in post-1997, and since then there's been a regular flow of votes of no confidence. But if you take a longer historic perspective, you would see that there is always an effort to try and get rid of leaders. That people were conspiring against Margaret Thatcher in 1981, and she went on for another 9 years. At that point, the SDP were over 50% in the opinion polls. People were trying to get rid of Churchill during the war. People had grave doubts about Disraeli. People were trying to get rid of Pitt the Younger. People thought that when George I was succeeded by George II, he would fire Walpole. It is the routine of politics. Walpole went on for 21 years. So I wouldn't focus on a narrow and particular rule. I would just look at the generality of politics, that there are always people who want the top job, and a lot of people who've been public in recent days clearly want the top job for themselves, and they therefore stir things up a bit. And we will see, I hope, the Prime Minister win the vote later on today, and then calm everything down.
Calm everything down. There wasn't much calm outside St Paul's Cathedral when he was being booed, was there?
Oh, it was a mere bagatelle. I mean, a little bit of booing, a little bit of cheering, that is perfectly normal. I mean, politicians...
I must just interrupt you there, if I may, please, Mr Rees-Mogg. A little bit of booing at the church steps of a great cathedral when people were gathered there to pay their respects to the Thanksgiving of this Queen.
Miss Burley, I think you overinterpret what happened. Political figures must expect this. Bear in mind, at the funeral of Margaret Thatcher, most successful Conservative Prime Minister electorally, there were protests. Politicians who do things, politicians who achieve things, politicians who lead the country well, obviously stir up strong emotions in certain sections of the population. That is what you would expect. And I think that the sort of piety that they were on the steps of St Paul's is not really reflective of modern British society.
Well, we're just going to play it anyway and see what our viewers think, and then perhaps you can tell me again what you think. Let's just have a very quick listen.
And the
That
volume
didn't
up
alarm
to
you at
get
all,
your
because
readers
when-
to be too
yeah.
concerned about that. That was a bit
Yeah.
miserable, really.
Okay. It's interesting you say that, because I've been speaking to some of your colleagues today and previous colleagues who've suggested that that was perhaps a turning point for some who've handed in their letters over the weekend. You think that, I suppose, in your words, would be piffle?
Well, that's not a word I use, actually. It's one more prime ministerial, I think you would find. But I think folderol would be the word of choice for me.
Okay. And why would you use that word in particular?
Oh, well, I think that anybody who is influenced by some muted noise that rather excited a few journalists would not be showing the judgment and wisdom that you would expect of a Conservative Member of Parliament.
Okay. In all seriousness, I mean, you've been shunted out early doors today to come out and support the Prime Minister.
I haven't been shunted out at all. I'm
Did you?
more than happy.
You
I
volunteered?
volunteered to come out. Nobody has had to force me to come out to support an exceptional, good, forward-looking Prime Minister.
He's taking the opportunity later on today, I believe, to address all backbench MPs. What do you think he needs to say in order to convince them that they should offer him their support?
Well, I think he needs to remind people of what he has achieved. And as always, Beth Rigby knows what's happening before I do. So I didn't know there was this meeting until she announced it. So as always, Sky is very well informed. But he needs to remind people of what he's achieved. And the election victory was a very personal victory. There are a lot of members of Parliament who owe their seats directly to Boris Johnson. And he has a mandate from the British people, and that is important. We are a representative democracy, but MPs are answerable to their constituents. And he got a mandate directly from them. He should point out what was achieved in terms of the COVID lockdown and getting the vaccine out so that our economy could open before anybody else's. He should point out the steps he has taken to help people with the cost of living crisis, which are pretty thoroughgoing. He should point out that he is leading the way in terms of Brexit, which, as I mentioned earlier, would be significantly at risk without his drive and energy.
Do you not think that they know that already, and yet at least 15% have decided that he's no longer the right person for the job?
Well, the thing about 15% is it means 85% are on the other side of the equation.
I said at least 15%, Mr.
I know.
Be more
I
than
know,
that.
but it's still worth remembering 15% isn't that many.
It also doesn't mean that 85% are on the other side of the equation. It means that they just haven't put in a letter.
That's a fair enough point. But 15% leaves 85% who one can assume at this stage have not come to the conclusion that they wish to get rid of him, what conclusion they come to later in the day. But they haven't got to the point of thinking this is urgent and that they want it to happen now. So I think it is worth bearing in mind that 85% so far, as far as we know, have not called for a vote. Or
Yeah.
a figure similar to that, because I imagine it's a little over the 15% target.
How much over do you think it might
I don't know, but just from the speculation one has heard.
Yeah, I'm just struggling. In fact, I found it now. The letter that was sent by Jessie Norman today, I don't know if you've had an opportunity to read that. But I mean, when a former minister uses words like describe yourself as vindicated by the report is grotesque, talking about the Queen's speech and elsewhere, your current policy priorities are deeply questionable. He goes on to say, you are the leader of the Conservative and Unionist Party, yet you are putting the Union itself gravely at risk. goes on to talk about the Rwanda situation as well, describes the policy on that as ugly. Literally, no holes barred there. What would you say in response to some of those accusations?
Well, Jesse points out that he was energy minister, and unfortunately, no proper energy plan was developed. So Mr. Norman must take some responsibility for that. He doesn't do so in his letter. You must ask him on Rwanda, what would he do? What is his solution to the crisis that we have with small boats? Why does he think this is a wrong policy? What is he coming up with? The use of the word grotesque is clear overstatement. Mr. Norman is a distinguished figure, an historian, and you would have thought he would weigh his words more carefully. But he seems to have a bone to pick not just with the Prime Minister, but with the whole range of government policy. So he is deciding that he simply doesn't support the Conservative manifesto and drive. We were elected to get immigration down. We therefore have to implement policies that will do that. And so I'm surprised that Mr. Norman is disassociating himself from the manifesto on which he was so clearly elected.
You talk about him being a considered historian, so I would flip that around and say to you, a considered historian who chooses his words carefully describes the policy as grotesque, or the attitude as grotesque.
I think he overstates his case and weakens it thereby. It's rather surprising that somebody like him should use hyperbolic language. You would have thought he would be more moderate in his phraseology, because it's clearly not grotesque. He may disagree with it, but grotesque is an absurdity.
How many votes this evening would you feel would be too many for this Prime Minister to continue on and feeling that he had the support of the party?
Oh, one is enough. That's the rule in a democracy. If you win by one, you've won.
And do you feel that if this Prime Minister won the vote tonight by one vote, he would feel that he had an appropriate mandate to continue on in his role as Prime Minister?
One is enough. It's no good saying that the rules of the party say something and then behind it, unofficially, there is some other rule that nobody knows and is invented for the purpose. I obviously want the Prime Minister to get as big a majority as possible. I think that would be helpful and it would close this matter down between now and the next general election, which would be good for the country, good for the Conservative Party. But one is enough.
So just to be clear, if I was to press you on this, forgive me, Mr. Rees-Mogg, if he won by one vote, he would have, in your opinion, a clear mandate to continue on in his role as Prime Minister?
Ms. Burley, to be absolutely clear, the answer is yes.
Are you sure?
Yes.
Unbelievable, some might say, if they're listening to you this morning here on Sky News, that you feel
Well, why should they say that?
If they won by just one vote, that would be sufficient to suggest that he had the backing of the party and the country.
Why should they say that? He won a majority of 80. He has a mandate from the British people, and the rules are quite clear. Bear in mind, when Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister, you had to defeat your rival by a majority plus 15%. There was an extra hurdle. It was open to the Conservative Party to write rules that put this hurdle in, but they did not. They decided that it was a straightforward up and down vote. And I think it's eccentric, really, to say that you have a democratic system and then you set another hurdle within it. If, as a Member of Parliament, you are elected with a majority of one, you are that Member of Parliament until the next general election, when people have another choice. That seems to me to be perfectly fair and how democracy works.
We have two by-elections coming up a fortnight on Thursday. The polls are suggesting that the Prime Minister will lose, or the Conservative Party will lose, both of those by-elections, one to the Liberal Democrats and one to the Labour Party. Is the writing not on the wall for this Prime Minister?
No, I mean, you know perfectly well the history of by-elections, that if you take the period 87 to 92, where the Conservatives lost by-election after by-election, in the 92 general election, if I remember correctly, we won every single one of them back. People vote differently in by-elections from how they vote in general elections, and that is well known. And you know, you can trace this back to Orpington, the most famous post-war by-election defeat of an incumbent government. That by-elections come and go. Governments very rarely win them. Actually, the Conservatives have only gained 3 by-elections in recent periods of office, Hartlepool being the most recent one, lo and behold, under Boris Johnson's leadership.
Can I just extrapolate from what you're saying there that you fear that you may lose these 2 by-elections?
No, I mean, it's not for me to say. The voters must have their vote, and the candidates, we have excellent candidates in both places. And we need to work hard to encourage people to turn out to vote. But I'm just mentioning in passing the history of by-elections, where governments often don't do particularly well in them and then win them back at general elections when people vote on different bases.
Just received a tweet saying, anyone who believes our country is stronger, fairer and more prosperous when led by Conservatives should reflect that the consequence of not changing will be to hand the country to others who do not share those values. Today's decision is change or lose. I will be voting for change. And that's from Jeremy Hunt.
Well, let's just swap quotes, because I've had a message from Peter and Brenda Yates from just outside Bristol, who say, we wish to convey to you our utmost confidence in our beloved Prime Minister. He must stay at the helm of our country. So I'm listening to people who live in and around Somerset. Mr. Hunt lost last time round, and therefore he clearly wants another go at it.
OK, so you'll listen to the people in Somerset, but you don't really want to listen to the people who are booing on the steps of St Paul's?
I will listen to the good people of Somerset who have great wisdom.